Hey guys, it's Lacy Estelle, and I'm super excited to do this episode. We're going to talk about something that I think plagues a lot of us with ADHD, but it also just plagues a lot of us women in general, and that is imposter syndrome. So if you've ever experienced it, listen up.
Welcome to an ADD Woman podcast. I'm your host, Lacy Estelle, writer of all things about ADHD parenting and being an ADHD mother on Mothering the Storm with Lacy Estelle at lacyestelle.com. Here on an ADD Woman podcast, we're going to switch it up and talk about all things to do with ADHD as an adult woman and how we deal with it. Now you might be thinking, ADHD, women don't really have that. Actually, we do. We've all just been doing such a great job for years of masking it. So let's dive in.
So first off, if you're unaware of what imposter syndrome is, or if you've never heard the term, which would really shock me in today's world of social media, imposter syndrome is where you a lot of times are stepping out of your comfort zone and you're doing something, you're making decisions about something that you feel like you're not adequate to make decisions about, or doing something, for instance, let's say you are deciding you want to be a speaker and you're sending applications to different events and saying, I would like to come speak at your event about this, this, and this. And then one of them comes back and says, sure, yes, we would love to have you. And you immediately think to yourself, oh no, am I actually equipped to do this job? Am I actually good enough to speak to a group about this specific thing? Do I have enough authority? Maya Angelou, who is a well-known writer, obviously, she's award-winning and she's wonderful. She used to say, I believe she told Oprah in an interview, you guys, I love that when you listen to me, you understand that I have an ADHD brain, because I'm always like, I think it was on something or other, or I heard it somewhere, but I know that it was definitely Maya Angelou who said it. I don't know when she said it, but she said that every time, and you think of Maya Angelou, you think of really great author, several published books. Every time she would put her manuscript in the mail and send it off to her editor, she said, that's it. This is going to be the time that they figure out, did they figure it out that I'm just an imposter. Now, she may not have said an imposter, but she said like, they're going to find me out. And that is what I would say is the underlying emotion behind imposter syndrome. And I use Maya Angelou because of the fact that everybody knows that she is the absolute opposite of what anybody would consider an imposter. But even she was not exempt from experiencing this feeling, this emotion of, am I enough to do the things I want to do? Ironically, women are way more prone to experiencing imposter syndrome than men. Does this surprise anybody? Probably not. We are more emotionally driven. And from what I gathered in a few of the ADHD groups that I'm a part of, a lot of women with ADHD severely suffer from it. Every time we want to step out of our comfort zone, we feel like, maybe I can't do this. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. So I think, and I theorize, but I will say that a lot of the sources I found online agreed with me. This all comes back to a few key things. First one being our perfectionism. As a woman with ADHD, especially if you've gone undiagnosed for a length of time throughout your adolescence to young adulthood, we have this constant drive to be perfect in certain things. Now, we've worked tirelessly to perform to a standard that we can never actually achieve, and throughout our life, only to realize that we can't achieve that perfect standard. So often when we realize this, we want to give up on whatever it is that we have set our sights on. Maybe it's a career or a new habit, even something as simple as trying to bake a cheesecake. Okay. If we can't do it perfectly, we shouldn't do it at all, right? This is a logical fallacy, guys. This is something that our ADHD brains have been trained to believe because of our constant feeling like the finish line is moving further and further away from us because we have ADHD. So when you have ADHD, there's a few key components in your brain that are behind as opposed to your neurotypical peers. And some of those things are things like your processing or your ability to sequence events, or your ability to think on the fly, think quickly in the moment, make decisive actions. And all that comes back to constantly feeling like, especially throughout our childhood and our adolescence, that finish line, man, it just moves on me. I can't get there. I can't just complete what I want to complete. Now, a lot of times this is because we have put so much pressure on ourselves to perform as well as or above our neurotypical peers, because we seem to think that if we can do things the way that everybody else does them, then the fear that we have that we're just not enough or we're not good enough, we can shed that. We can get rid of it. And we can say, oh, but clearly look, because I could do this perfectly. But the truth is that even our neurotypical peers, they don't do things perfectly. Nothing is perfect. Even if you do things as close to the desired outcome as possible, nothing in this world is perfect. Even if you bake a cake and you do it exactly as the recipe states, exactly the way you're supposed to do it, and everything comes out there, I promise you there still will be one blemish. Now, maybe you become an expert in whatever it is that you want to pursue. I would say that that's a different conversation for a different day, because oftentimes I meet women who are experts, or I meet just people in general who are experts, and they still tell me they experience imposter syndrome. Full disclosure, when I started this podcast, I asked myself, can I really talk to ADHD women, specifically Christian ADHD women, and can I speak with enough authority to expound on God's word and trust that He will lead the words that I'm saying? Can I do that? Or should I shrink back and say, oh, let me just stay in my comfort zone? So here's the truth of that logical fallacy. Failure is part of success. Failure is not achieving things perfectly, because that is an impossible standard we will never get to. None of us. Doesn't matter if you have ADHD, if you don't have ADHD, perfection is impossible. Failure is only, and I know this sounds so cliche, failure is only quitting. It is only quitting. It is only quitting. Say it with me. Failure is only quitting. Now, failure is not pivoting in your business or changing your mindset about a new habit that you want to create, or falling off the wagon on your diet that you've been doing great with for 5 days. And then all of a sudden you have, an extra piece of chocolate and you're just like, see, I can't do it. That is not failure. Failure is when you have those setbacks and you have those moments, and instead of your next opportunity to rewrite that and do things differently, you don't take it, and instead you just quit on yourself because you just assume that you're going to fail anyways. The only way you fail is by quitting. You have to redefine how you view failure from a perfect is an achievable standpoint, which is totally false and is not true, to a sustained momentum towards growth is a much more reasonable outlook on failure. So if you have a setback in your business, if something happens, or if there's, and I keep using business as what I'm talking about here, but it doesn't have to be business. You could have a parenting moment that you totally mess up. I've done it several times. It does not mean that you're a terrible mom. If you listen to my story, I have a lot of things that I could sit in the dark and just be ashamed about, that I exposed my children to at times when they were super vulnerable. And I don't like the fact that they may someday have to revisit those moments and see how inexperienced, young, naive, and immature their own mother was. But the truth is, nobody comes out of the other side of this thing totally knowing exactly what they're doing. We don't go through life being able to achieve any sort of perfect standard ever. It doesn't work that way. And if you're a Christian and somehow you've been telling yourself, well, if I just do it perfectly. I remember when I got to college, I put so much pressure on myself that it was either me get a 4.0 or I just failed. When grades anywhere between a 3.0 and a 4.0 would have been great and would have been a lot less pressure for me to perform. So a lot of this imposter syndrome comes from this idea that someday we'll hit that finish line, someday we'll get there, and then we won't feel this way. And it's just not true. Every time that you step into authority that God has given you, whether that is becoming a wife and getting married, or that is becoming a mom, or that is taking on a higher up paying job, or that is choosing to go back to school for a career that you really desire. Even when you get to the point of you finishing your education and you're in that career, you are still going to stand there and be like, oh, am I an imposter? Can they see through me? Is my skin clear? That is how it's going to feel every time that you are moving that finish line for yourself. So you have to stop moving that finish line. And you have to say, okay, screw the finish line. Pardon my language, but screw the finish line. It's not about the finish line anymore. It's about running the race. So here's the next thing that I think causes ADHD women to definitely be more prone to imposter syndrome. And that is, as women with ADHD, often, if we haven't been diagnosed until later in life, we're conditioned by the environment we were raised in to believe that we are incorrect, or we're too facetious, we're too callous, we're too impulsive, we're too unrealistic. Lacy's just too naive. She doesn't see things the way that she should see them. This is one thing that I think was really ingrained to me coming from my mother. And it was nothing wrong with my mother, but my mother was a very indecisive person. And then on top of her being indecisive, I had ADHD. And so for a long time, I would make choices. And then later I'd be like, oh, that wasn't the right choice. And my mom had to see me do this repeatedly over and over again throughout my adolescence and my young 20s. And so to her, that conditioned her to want to push me to make sure I'm thinking of every single concern that I should have before I get into something like that. And it got to a point to where it used to frustrate me to no end, because I would tell her, I think I'm going to do this. And she would immediately go, oh, well, but what if this happens? Or, but what if this happens? And to me, all she was ever seeing was that, oh, Lacy, you're not thinking this through. Truth be told, I probably wasn't thinking it through. That is actually a strength of an ADHD person. Now, stay with me here. It's not always a strength, but when it comes to making decisions about your career or a risk you want to take that other people probably wouldn't take, you want to start a business, you want to make the leap, you meet the person who is the love of your life, they check all the boxes, and I mean they check all the boxes and they don't have any red flags, okay? And you're like, I think we're just going to go get married. And people will go, whoa, wait, are you sure? Are you being realistic about this? Is this a good idea? And for women with ADHD, we hear those rebuttals from other people, I think 10 times more than our neurotypical peers here, because they're much less likely to do things like, oh, well, like Anna in Frozen. Oh, I met him tonight and we got engaged. Our neurotypical peers are the ones that they tend to walk the line, basically. They went to school, they finished this, they graduated, they applied to college, they went off to college. Maybe they had a college boyfriend, maybe they didn't. They didn't get serious about dating until afterwards. They definitely didn't get pregnant at 18 like I did. You get what I'm saying? So I think that it's common for the people who care about us the most to question our own decisions and whether or not our brain is allowing us to think of every possible scenario, right? So when you've heard this over and over again, are you sure? Maybe you're being too much this, or you're too much that, or you don't take things seriously enough. Having been told most of our lives that we are too much of anything, it really creates a cognitive dissonance in us that perpetuates our struggle to make decisions. So if you are an ADHD girl who's been told several times over that you take the hard road, or this is going to be difficult for you, or I don't know if you're thinking everything through, eventually those voices, they become ingrained in your mind, and that's all you hear. You go to want to make a decision and you start to go, oh, am I not thinking this through? Is this not the right choice? Am I doing too much for myself? How can I know? And again, it's less making the decisions, and it comes out more in like second guessing the decisions that we're making. And I believe that's really probably just a very broad understanding of imposter syndrome in general. So we start to live on the what ifs, and we start to question ourselves. What if this goes wrong? What if I made the wrong choice? What if it all falls down around me and everyone is looking at me because they realize I made the decision, or I did the thing, or I tried the idea and clearly I had no idea what I was doing? But here's the truth. This is a logical fallacy too. And we trap ourselves in our own mind because we tell ourselves that we can't prepare enough because we won't think of everything. Guess what? You'll never think of everything, ever. When doctors go to school, they get a bachelor's degree for 4 years. Okay. After that bachelor's degree, they apply to a med school program. They get a med school degree. I think it takes them the next 3, sometimes 4 years. Then they start their residency, which basically means that they're an intern doctor. They've graduated from college, but even hospitals say, yeah, but you're not quite a doctor yet. After you do residency, you then go on to be a resident physician at the hospital that you did a residency at, usually. Not always. Sometimes you change, you go somewhere else or whatever. But then if you're going to further study to go into a specialty, you're going to go to even more studying with them. All of this, okay, just to be able to make a choice for somebody's health and to make that choice in a concise manner and do it and feel like you're prepared. And guess what? I guarantee that those students still step out of all of that learning and go, oh my gosh, what if I make the wrong choice? And guess what happens? And we know this because of lawsuits. Some of them make the wrong choice. Some of them don't lose their careers over it. But my point is that you cannot possibly know everything about everything. You can't. You don't know what you don't know. So when you have these moments of feeling like, what if it all falls out? Ultimately, you have to be courageous enough to make the choice, make the decision and say, okay, this is it. And this is what it's going to be. And I've prepared as much as I can. What else can I do? Ask any mother, okay? Ask any mother if when they had their first child, if they were prepared. And I don't care if they had a great career, if they knew exactly what they were doing, if they were married, had a house, had all the things, had all their ducks in rows, they will still tell you, I had no idea. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I had no idea how difficult it would be. I had no idea. They might have read every single book in the library. I don't know. They might have done everything they could to try to prepare. But sometimes you just can't prepare that much. And so putting that amount of pressure on yourselves, all it does, especially when you have ADHD, is it stalls us. We get into analysis paralysis. We start questioning every little thing. Well, what if I'm not thinking of this far enough? What if I'm not doing? Part of having ADHD, part of having an entrepreneurial brain, which is what most of us with ADHD have, is the ability to take risks, because our ability to say, well, you know what? If that problem comes, I'll solve it later. Now, it drives the people that care about us who are neurotypical nuts around us. But ultimately, what did I say earlier? The only real failure is quitting. So say you're like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to change the way I eat. And you hear all the naysayers. Well, I had a boyfriend at one point. I was trying to eat healthier. I really wanted to eat healthier because I liked the way I felt when I ate healthier. And every time I would eat something, he'd be like, I just don't understand why you don't just eat what you want. And I was like, I am eating what I want. And he was like, yeah, but you never eat anything that tastes good. I'm like, the stuff I eat does taste good to me. So there's going to be people that say, you're not thinking it through. It's not the right choice. It's not the thing you should be doing. It's maybe you're being wrong about it. Maybe you're not thinking it through. There's always going to be those people. And you have to just say, yeah, you might be right. I might totally be unprepared. I'm going to do it anyways. Going to give it a shot because I can't stop thinking about it. And it's definitely what I want to do. So that is the next logical fallacy. So the other thing is, where does imposter syndrome relate to our faith as Christian women? And I probably should have opened with this, but I'm going to end on it. And I want to talk about 2 parts in the Bible. One part that I have been taught on a long time ago, and that was Gideon and the Midianites. And that is back in Judges. If you go back to Judges 6, and in Judges 6, we find that the Israelites have again done what they constantly seem to do in the Old Testament, and that is fallen away from God. God tells them, don't sin, don't do this, follow my rules, pleads with them, and pours out food from heaven, quite literally. And then they still end up cowering, sinning, and turning away from God. And we know this because the condition of man is sinful. We are sinful by nature because of the fall and everything that comes with it. So again, they have turned away from the Lord, and God comes down in what is called the angel of the Lord, and he appears actually. And in my translation, it's the angel of the Lord is capitalized because it's believed here that this would have been Jesus in the Old Testament appearing, the angel of the Lord. And he appeared to Gideon and he said, the Lord is with you, O brave man. Now, this always strikes me because, and I've heard other Bible teachers talk about it before, one of the first things you often hear when there's an angel encounter in the Old Testament is, do not fear. Do not fear, the Lord is with you. Do not fear. And in this case, he says, the Lord is with you, O brave man. Now, what's interesting to me is God is telling Gideon that. And when we come down further in Judges 6:15, Gideon said to him, please, Lord, how am I to rescue Israel? Behold, my family is the least in Manasseh, and I am the youngest, smallest in my father's house. So here you have Gideon, who the Lord is decreeing, oh, brave man, saying, I can't do this. I'm not big enough. I'm too small. My family is the meekest. Okay. So that is one example of how, and you can find a plethora of examples very similar to this, of God calling someone to a purpose higher than what they would enable themselves to achieve and decreeing them. Now, when I listened to the commentary on these pieces, he spoke about how God, in the same breath, when he is saying, the Lord is with you, O brave man, he is not just addressing Gideon in a flattering manner. He is decreeing as God that you are a brave man, and he is there imbuing him with that bravery. Now, of course, Gideon still, this is God in the flesh standing right before him, and Gideon is still going, I don't know, I don't think I could do it. So one of the things that when we are dealing with imposter syndrome as Christian women, especially Christian women who have ADHD, we need to go to God about it. You need to pray about the thing that you want to do. And you need to step into that and say, Lord, if this is what you are calling me to do, then you have to make a way. You have to lead me. You have to guide me. Now, I don't want to stay with just Gideon. I actually want to go into Esther, because if we want to talk about a woman having to apply these things, then Esther is definitely the way to go. Now, if you know the story of Esther is that there was a queen, and the king was Xerxes. The queen was Vashti originally, and Vashti was summoned by her king to come to him, and she refused. Now, in ancient times, in Middle Eastern ancient times, and even sometimes in Middle Eastern times today, the woman is owned by the man. So this was extremely disrespectful. Even as the queen, you would think she has the power to say, no, I don't want to come. I don't want to come there. And thank the Lord that we in the United States have that much power to tell our husbands, no, sorry, I don't want to sit with you right now. But Vashti didn't have that sort of authority, and she told him no. And because he feared that this would cause revolt with the women in the entire kingdom, and feared that because the own queen can say no to the king, well, he had to show his authority. And it's understood, it's not exactly explicitly said, but it's understood that Vashti died. So he may have had her beheaded. So it just goes to give you a little bit of background as to how dangerous it is for any woman to assert herself over what would have been considered a man's authority back then. Okay. Now, enter Mordecai and Esther. Now, there's Jewish people living inside this kingdom, and Mordecai, from what we understand about the context of what it's been talking about, Mordecai has clearly been given a pretty high ranking with the king. He may have been part of the king's advisors. He may have been something along those lines, but he ends up hearing that the king is going to be looking for a new wife. And long story short, Esther wins that title, and she becomes queen. Now, when she's in about her 4th or 5th year of reign, enter the next character in this plot design, and that's Haman. Now, Haman, he was descended from what would have been the enemy of the Jews. Now, I'm not 100% sure which tribe of somewhere in the Middle East that was, but he hated the Jewish people. And he decides to basically, by using the king's authority, because he's really good friends with the king, he just asked the king, he said, hey, can I make this decision for you? There are these people in your kingdom that really shouldn't be here. And if you say it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of them. Now, what he didn't tell the king, or at least what it leaves off, is that I'm going to basically murder hundreds of people in your kingdom for no reason other than the fact that I just don't like them. But I'm also going to pay you with all of the fruits that I get from all of their treasures that are left behind after they're killed. So when this happens, Mordecai becomes outraged and he begins mourning and weeping in front of the king's court. And this is seen as very, very embarrassing. Esther requests of him to please get dressed. She sends him clothing because he's standing out there in rags and he is just crying out to the king. And he's weeping to the Lord, begging for help. And Esther says, please get dressed. Please just put some clothes on and stop doing this. And instead, Mordecai says, no, I won't just get dressed for you. So Esther then investigates further and she says that clearly something else is going on. So she sends another one of the men that were at her aid to go talk to Mordecai and find out exactly what's going on. Mordecai actually gives this man a text of the decree which had been issued for the Jews' destruction. Of course, Mordecai is not the only one weeping and mourning. All of the Jews are fasting and panicking and fear-stricken because of this decree that they're just all going to be killed. And Esther, at first, she replies and she tells her servant to tell to Mordecai, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court without being summoned, he has but one law, and that he is to be put to death. So basically, she's trying to advocate on her behalf to Mordecai how serious this could be for her if she were to try to go to the king when he hasn't summoned her. Now, mind you, I just explained to you about how the queen prior to Esther died because she didn't come when she was called. But at this time, it was just as much a major offense of disrespect to go to the king when you hadn't been summoned. So Esther, even though she has a lot of favor with the king, she still understands that she's not in a place that could guarantee that she goes to the king. He might not even hear what she has to say. He might actually sentence her to die because he sees it as a disrespectful thing for her to do. So Mordecai replies to Esther and he says, do not imagine that you are in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. So basically, he's reminding her, just because you have become queen does not mean you are no longer Jewish. And when they find out that you are Jewish, what do you think they're going to do to you? He said, for if you remain silent at this time, now this is the part where he has great faith. He says, liberation and rescue will arise for the Jews from another place. And you and your father's house will perish, basically because you didn't help us when you had the opportunity. And who knows whether you have attained royalty for such a time as this. Now, he's forcing her to see that even though she may be lacking in faith, he's not. Now, he's going to her and telling her, you need to do this. You need to advocate on our behalf because we are your people first. We are God's people first, and you are God's daughter first, right? You are King Xerxes. You're his second. So you need to advocate for us. If you don't, I still have faith that God, who is way above you in all of this, will save us from this because we are God's people. But if you don't take this opportunity, I don't know what will happen to your family. I don't know how God will deal with you. So it's a lot for Esther to think about. And when she's thinking about this, she has to remember that her Jewish roots are telling her that she has to answer to God first before she answers to anybody else. And if that means in death, she answers to God, she wants to be able to go there and say, I did what you called me to do at the time you called me to do it. I didn't stand and cower. I didn't worry so much so. I had faith, as Mordecai's having faith. I had faith, and I stepped out in that faith that you, God, would take care of me. Now, Esther then replies to Mordecai, and she says, go, gather all the Jews that are present in Susa, and observe a fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will also fast in the same way. Then I will go in to see the king without being summoned, basically, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So, in other words, if I die, I die. When you are thinking, or you're in a moment of, can I really do this? What you're stepping out into, or what you need to have the courage of, is not of yourself. As a Christian woman, this is an opportunity for you to apply the faith you've been given by God, that if He wants you to do this thing, if He wants you to step towards doing it, if you feel led, maybe you felt convicted lately to take better care of your body, or maybe you felt convicted lately that you need to stand up and confront somebody and not shy away from conflict just because it feels uncomfortable, but instead need to use words with somebody, to talk to them about it. And that the whole situation just feels like, how can I say that to them? Maybe I am in the wrong. You just feel like a total imposter. But if God has led you to do it, then your faith when you step out to do that is not on you. It's not on the courage you have. It's not on the ability you have. It's on the faith that God will see it through. Now, if that's through you, or if that is through another way, as Mordecai told Esther, say your vision is to create a home for girls. You want to create a place for survivors of domestic violence. You want to have somewhere for them to go. You want something that is Christian for them to see the love of God. God puts that on your heart, and you speak to your pastor and you pray about it and you do all these things and you're like, I want to do this. I want to do this. And then what stalls you is you feeling like, oh, I'm an imposter. We are not perfect. We are not perfect people. We are imperfect people, and God loves us and died for us as sinners. So that means that when you decide to step out in faith, that faith is not on you. That faith is on God. That faith is on Jesus to see it through, regardless of the mistakes you make, regardless of the failures you have, regardless of all the things that you feel like, oh my gosh, I did it wrong. I screwed up. I made the wrong decision. Whatever. Lord, help me. Help me in this. Help me do this the way that you would have me do it. Guide me and lead me in everything. That is what you're doing. You're not leaning on yourself. You're leaning on Him. If you lean on Him, even in the words of Esther, if you die, you die. There's not very many things that I know of in the Western culture that we live in, where when you have imposter syndrome, the reality of peril, the feeling like you might die, is a real thing. Now, maybe if it's put on you to go on a mission trip to somewhere like Pakistan, or if it's put on you to help get Bibles into China, those are very real, very scary things that could cause you peril. But you have to recognize that if God did what He said He did, and if you believe what He said He did, He gave you everlasting life. The things He calls you to in this life, He will see you through to do them. So you can step out in faith in Him and not worry about the mistakes you're going to make, because God is God. And He's going to make it regardless of what you do. He doesn't need you. And I know that sounds so wrong, right? But He doesn't. He doesn't need you. But if He wants to use you, He will. But you have to be willing to have faith in Him to do it. Just like Esther, just like Gideon, all of those things. Now, a lot of people will say, well, if God called you, He'll equip you. It doesn't always feel that way. It doesn't always feel that way. A lot of times it feels like, okay, Lord, hurry up, equip me so I can feel good about what I'm supposed to be doing. Okay, I just need you. Can you just give me a little bit more? Can I get a little bit more juice? Whatever that is. I need that mojo, whatever they call that. Can you give me a little bit more of that so I can feel good about it? Sometimes it doesn't work that way. Sometimes the doubt that you're feeling is Him telling you, fall on me, pray to me, cry out to me. I will be with you every step of the way. So that is what I have to say about imposter syndrome. I hope it was helpful for you. I would love to talk more about this, and I'm going to try to do a better job of pre-planning exactly what I'm going to talk about and more about what I'm going to talk about in reference to, passages in the Bible and expounding on those things so that you can relate to them in God's word, because I find that is where I get the most wisdom out of anything else, is when I really dive into His word. So I will be talking to you guys soon. I hope you have a great week. God bless.
That is going to wrap up this episode of an ADD Woman podcast. And if any of the things I just said are of interest to you, love to hear what you think, and I'll be talking to you guys soon.